Welcome to episode 6 of the Let's Get Engaged podcast. Today we will be discussing leadership on college and university campuses, as well as acknowledging race relations globally and how to take steps to both educate yourself and to become proactive in the fight against systemic racism. Our featured guests and university leadership experts are James Wright and Kayshen Morel. James is from Jersey City, New Jersey, but he is currently living in Reno, Nevada, working for the University of Nevada, Reno Housing Department. He loves to travel, working with students, and tackling all of the challenges that life presents him. Kayshen is from Vineland, New Jersey, and is currently the area coordinator for residential education at Hobart and William Smith Colleges in Geneva, New York. He is a first-generation college student who recently graduated with a master's in counseling. He enjoys dancing, kayaking, longboarding, and playing video games. Now let's get engaged. All right, I would like to welcome James and Kayshen here today. They are two university leadership experts, and I'm honored to have you both on Let's Get Engaged podcast today.
Thank you for having us. We are excited. We're ready to go. Whatever the topic is, we're ready to talk about. Hopefully people get something from this, and hopefully, we end up having a great conversation.
Facts. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. So I had the privilege of going to school and working with you both at Stockton University. For some of it was Stockton College. I still have some of the merchandise, but we're Stockton U now. And I know you guys in class, and I also had the opportunity to work beside you in residential life, which was an absolute privilege. And so I have strayed from the course, but you guys have not. You have stayed true. And you've still been working in a lot of housing and leadership roles. Do you feel like there was anything specific that drew you to the role in the first place?
I would say for me, I think it was one, the free housing, right? We start off with that from the inner city, not having money to pay for college. I would say it started off for me just like the free housing piece. But ultimately, as I kind of went through like my housing process, I've been in housing for 7 years, including undergrad. And ultimately, I realized that representation was a big piece of why I joined housing. No offense to like Stockton or anything like that, but the RA team was like really white when I first got there. And the only Black person I knew was my friend Ellis, who was a year older than me, so I think the representation piece was definitely really important for me. The leadership skills you learn when being an RA and being in housing, they don't select just, somebody who hasn't been involved, who's just going to class. They select people who are involved, who are also doing well academically. So I think that definitely challenged me to be like an RA and ultimately continue like to be a grad in housing, to be a professional in housing, and going from there. So, yeah.
Yeah, for myself, James actually became an RA the year before I did. He actually inspired me to join into Res Life. The year that he interviewed to be an RA, I was interviewing to be an admissions ambassador. So I was giving tours to like prospective, first years and stuff like that. And I think from joining that club, I kind of caught that bug of definitely wanted to be involved more in the community. And the Res Life community was something that I was very much so very interested in. So after having James on the inside and kind of connecting me to those people, it kind of just started from there. Being 7 years in, as James said, especially undergrad and in my graduate experience, it really is education outside of the classroom. And that's something that I never really knew about growing up until you reach higher education. So we're in it now.
Yep, we're in the thick of it, especially with COVID.
Yep.
Which is adding so many different hoops and red tape and interesting things that housing never expected. I'm glad you were willing to admit you did it for the housing. So honestly, I feel like I've always been a person who was into service, and volunteering, it was a part of me. But I really I was working 3 jobs trying to put myself through school. And I was I just need a place that I can live and have it be my job. And it opened up other avenues for me on the campus. So I started working in the community engagement department. So the teacher who wrote my recommendation to be a housing person was the person who was desperate to get me closer to the university because he wanted me in that department. Right. So he threw me a bone. And I didn't expect also the leadership opportunities we would get or the training we would get. I did not think about that whatsoever before I joined, but I do feel it was integral for personal development
and just like being a leader in general, like having to run those meetings, being the same age as people and trying to get people to respect you and listen to you when they could also sometimes be older than you are. You know,
Right.
I never thought twice about any of it, but I'm glad I got thrown into that chaos because I really feel like it helped me grow as a person for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Go ahead, Kayshen.
No, yeah, not only like personally, but professionally as well. Like being like 19, 20 years old and dealing with like your first crisis kind of situations. And like learning how to not only like navigate that situation with someone in front of you, but then like all the administrative things that occur afterwards with like writing any kind of reports, following up with your supervisors. Doing that as an undergrad, like really like helped me become who I am today professionally. And now doing that is just like, you know, a muscle memory. It's a reflex.
Yeah. I mean, we were doing that at 19 years old too. Like, you know, so like we were young. I mean, now we have like more education, like Kayshen has said. And I think ultimately, like you talked about this too, Morgan, like just the, you know, you being in leadership positions set you up for other leadership positions. And that was similar to like my experience too. I mean, I think prior to being an RA, I was just the mascot and that's all. I also worked at the information desk. But once I became an RA, like it opened up doors for me that I never knew like existed in higher education. I never knew that there was like a student affairs or higher ed program in grad school. I never knew that I could travel. You know, I think my first time after my first job after an RA was being an orientation leader. Ended up going to Denver, Colorado. My first time out of New Jersey. I think that like all those points kind of set us up for like at the beginning of being an RA up until where we are now. And I mean, I would also say it's a credit to higher education too and student affairs because it's so flexible, it's so adaptable. So I don't have to stay in housing for 7 years. You know, I can go work in orientation if I wanted to, or go work in maybe the athletics department or the student center or something like that. So it really opened both of us up to like a bunch of different job and leadership opportunities.
Yeah, and I definitely, Kayshen, mentioning like things being easier for you and professionally. Like I feel like as far as reporting to supervisors, you're right, like having clear reports. I feel like a lot of other people around me drop that ball a lot easier, and I'm always just kind of like on the money for it. And it's nice to have that training young and just to make those good habits young, quite frankly. So you guys have stayed the course, you know, so we've been talking about like what got us there, but like what do you think keeps you there? Because like you said, there's other places you could be within the campus. Is there anything specific? I remember last time we were having a conversation about you had said, of course, like you want to empower your students and you want to be able to support them. But I remember you talking about how you were also felt like you learned from them like all the time as well.
Yeah, I would definitely say being in higher education in general, like it's a learning experience. You're constantly learning, like, and not to mention we work in multi-generational departments. So like I'm working with people who are like 50 years old, 60 years old. I'm working with students who are, you know, they were born the same year that my youngest sister was born, you know? So I think all that kind of like sets up for like a great working environment where you can learn from a bunch of different people. And I would say ultimately, like my credit goes to the students who I supervise and who teach me things every single day. You can ask my staff now. I mean, the two things I encourage them to do is always advocate for themselves and always, always, always speak up for other people. I mean, I think that's really important, especially in the time that we're living in, right? You don't necessarily have to agree with everybody, but you do need to make sure that you're speaking up for them when things are wrong. And we all know what's right from wrong. Like you're born knowing that it's wrong to hurt people. Like you should not be doing that. Somewhere along the line from like when we're a baby up until when we're an adult, now we think that this stuff is okay, but it's not. So I think that empowering students to make sure that they're advocating for themselves, that'll not only help them now as a student, right? It would ultimately help them as a professional as they go throughout their life. So, yeah.
Yeah, so for me, the reason why I have stayed the course and have still in higher education, the year after I graduated undergrad, I had an internship. Actually, before I graduated, I had an internship at Covenant House, New Jersey, a homeless shelter in Atlantic City. Oh, claps, word.
I
okay.
used to deliver food there. Yeah, it was a part of a group that like our whole goal was to use redistributed foods where we would package it and cook it at the Atlantic City High School.
Hey.
And then I had a bus from the Boys and Girls Club that would pick us up and we would go to the Covenant House and bring them hot meals to have.
Oh, that's awesome. That's incredible. Yeah, so I had an internship there before I graduated. And after I graduated, luckily they were fortunate enough to offer me a position there as a youth advisor. So kind of like a counselor, but like not a master's level, you know, just a bachelor's level counselor. And while I was there, you worked with like youth that were from 18 to 21. So that cohort was very similar to like the same cohort that you'd like, interact with on a college campus, but they were at-risk youth who had issues ranging from mental health to like, requiring like some kind of like law aid and services. And, even like basic needs like housing, food, and shelter. And I worked there for an entire year after like, I graduated from Stockton, and I had some crazy experiences there. I really like touched like a lot of lives there, and those same lives touched me in terms of like, the resilient hearts that like were within that institution. But even though I was there, it made me miss being in an educational setting. And after a year of being there, I actually ended up being a resident director at Rowan University, getting back into res life because there was just like that itch that I couldn't scratch. Like, being in a setting like that, it was great. And I knew that I was creating like a huge impact helping these kids. But being in an institution of higher education really helps you in terms of like, all right, so I have a support system around me, the resources and a network around me to not only like get this book or this like documentary or like, this resource, but it's just the kind of thing where like you really can cultivate yourself, not only like personally, but professionally and academically. And that for me is a lot more of a holistic approach to growth. And that's why I think attracted me back into higher education.
Awesome. And so you guys are not holding down the fort in New Jersey anymore though, right? So James, you're in Nevada. Kayshen, you're off in New York, right? So for anybody who's thinking, is New York that different from New Jersey? Kayshen grew up in like Vineland. That's a very farm-oriented area. So Nevada is desperately different than New Jersey. So have you guys found any value in the experiences being on, campuses that look very different from the ones that we had before?
I'll let Kayshen take this one first. I've been taking the last two questions, so if you wanted to start, Kayshen.
Oh, I thank you, James.
Oh, wait, thank you.
So yeah, right now I'm currently in Geneva, New York. So I'm at Hobart and William Smith colleges. So it's a small private liberal arts institution. Coming from like Stockton or Rowan, this is like a lot more of a smaller school than what I'm used to. So I'm still trying to assimilate myself into like the culture and into the community. And it's like, especially difficult right now, like having to like be very mindful of like literally your physical distance from other people and like conducting most of your meetings and the interactions over Zoom. But what I do find is that like, it's a lot more of like an intimate kind of setting. Like you're not like a number here at all in terms of like being a student, and in terms of being like a professional faculty or staff member. You really have to lean upon one another and collaborate upon one another so that like, you're providing the best services for the students here. So like, I'm glad that I recently was able to meet with like individuals in like the diversity and equity and, inclusion department, as well as like, meeting individuals that used to be in my position and have just like moved upwards in the institution. So I really find that like, being at a smaller institution in this like community and in this environment, it's really, really different, but I'm a really big fan of like getting yourself outside of your comfort zone and like, kind of like pushing yourself to grow.
I would definitely agree with Kayshen. I think I moved out here because exposing myself to different places has always been something that I've wanted to do, like from undergrad to grad school. I applied to Michigan State for grad school. I applied to Florida International for grad school. Didn't accept me, obviously, but it's okay. I had crazy for a little bit. But I think ultimately, like exposing yourself to different environments, to different cultures, to different people, like sets you up for success. And I think Trevor Noah said it best. He said, there's one thing you won't waste your money on, and that's traveling. It changes your mind, your perspective. Traveling is a cure to ignorance. And that's very true, right? I mean, like I'm all the way on a different coast with people who have a different mindset, a different style of living. I'm gonna have to try to adjust to that and adapt. I remember my first experience being here in Nevada. You hear about the West Coast being a lot more friendly than the East, but like I'm in the grocery store, like going through the pasta aisle, just like looking at pasta, which one do I want to buy? Random guy out of nowhere was just like, here's some, I forget like the type of pasta that he was using, but he was just like, here's what I use, I put it on the stove for like 5 minutes, like just kind of talk to me about the whole pasta aisle in a matter of like 5 minutes. And I'm just like, thank you. And I just bought the normal pasta that I was always going to buy anyway. But like, it's experiences that I'm just like, wow, like this would have never happened on the East Coast or in New Jersey. And that's okay. It's a different culture, a different mindset. So ultimately, like if my advice to like younger people or just people in general, like get out and explore the world. There are a lot of states that I haven't been to that I would love to explore, a lot of countries that I haven't been to. And ultimately, like that sets you up for success because you know that one, the world is not centered around America. and you in America is the world is not centered around you also. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. So if you don't know, you listeners out there, if you live in New Jersey, live in New York, you do not talk to strangers. You do not really even like keep your head up that much. You've got your earbuds in, your music on, like you stay in your own lane. And especially as a woman, I'm taught like obviously like just don't talk to random people. Like you're
Right.
vulnerable, you know? And so it was funny when I moved down to first to Virginia and Roanoke and then here to North Carolina and Raleigh. I was not used to people like waving to me. People would be waving. I'd be like checking my shoulder first. Like they must be waving to someone else. And I'm like, there's no one here. Like, hi. Or I was at the grocery store, like you're saying. I had on a flyer shirt and I didn't even realize it. I just like put on a t-shirt and left the house. And he's like, oh, I couldn't believe last night. I'm like, is somebody talking to me? You're talking to me? Yes. We're having a conversation about the hockey game right now. And it ended up being a really lovely conversation. And unfortunately, they had lost like 4-0. So I was like, it was a bummer, right? And so he was like, I'm still hurt. So it was funny. We bonded over our pain of Philly not doing so hot. And I just wouldn't.
I mean, still to this current day, they aren't. So, I mean, hey, you could.
It's fine. It's fine. I'm not worried about it. I'll stay loyal till I die. It's fine. Like South Jersey is Philly. And so I am a Flyers fan. I'm an Eagles fan. I don't know why they got rid of Foles. I think they're out of their mind. I don't know what's going on, but
I agree with that.
That was a bad call. But it's fine. I'm a supporter of Philly. And it's just funny. You run into a lot of people sometimes from the north who say the same thing as me. They're like, I moved here and I never went back up. Like, you don't have to put a winter coat on, you know. And so it was like a culture shock in a lot of ways. The food is real different. There's a lot of fried stuff everywhere. I eat a lot of fish and salads. So some of me like went through a little bit of a shock phase, but like I just would also recommend people, like it gets you out of your element. You learn different skills. And I feel like being caught off guard by my neighbors being so polite made me a better businesswoman. Now when I deal with my clients, I'm like, I can do small talk, you know, we're talking about people's dogs and stuff like that. Like I'm good for it now. But that took practice for me. I was not good at that immediately because I was not trained to do that from my environment, you know. So I was not ready for the hospitality. They say it's a Southern thing, I guess.
Yeah, same, Morgan, same. But it's really cool though. I will say it's really cool. Like just meeting different people. So yeah, kudos to us for moving.
All right. So obviously we're in a global pandemic. The whole world is on fire. We're trying desperately to revolutionize policies and things to support race and things of that nature. Are you guys noticing any of this spilling into your universities or kids with their programming or just any other voices, kids speaking up, stuff like that?
I would say for me, definitely after the death of George Floyd, I've seen a lot of, I would say symbolic things for the most part. Like I play video games a lot and Call of Duty is one of those games that I play. And I remember shortly after George Floyd's death, they had to put up like Black Lives Matter signs on like their loading screens and things like that. I've seen a bunch of universities kind of put it up, corporations, organizations. So they were like good symbolic wins and victories for not just the Black Lives Matter organization, but just to get awareness to people, right? I think that's the biggest thing, that Black Lives Matter, that all this stuff happening right now, it's awareness, right? It's acknowledging that these things are happening in our country. How can we be better people and how can we change it? And unfortunately, America has yet to like acknowledge and make people aware of these things happening for centuries, you know? So I think ultimately, like we have to make sure that you know, we're educating our students properly, that they are educating their parents. I've had multiple meetings, especially after George Floyd death, where I would be in meetings with people who are way older than me and they were white and they would say to me, you know, like, I don't know where to start with racism. I don't know where to go. Two things for me that's unfortunate because like you're 50 years old, right? You don't know how to talk about race. So if you don't know how to talk about race, how can I expect your child who's the same age as me to talk about race? I'm not expecting them to be knowledgeable on everything. And I myself am not knowledgeable on everything. I'm learning new things every single day. But I think it's that acknowledgement, it's that knowledge, it's that making sure that when you go home to your like white family, right, that you're telling them, hey, this is how we're going to stop racism. This is how we're not going to be racist. When you're going home, when you're a man and you're going home to your daughters and you're saying, hey, I'm going to work to be a better man, to be a better person, to prevent sexism from happening. You know, I'm going to stand up for you. I'm going to advocate for you. Things like that, I think, are things that we need to acknowledge. We need to start talking about because I mean, ultimately, there are other countries that do this well, and I'll kind of like shift it over to Kayshen, but we need to start acknowledging racism. Like it's time.
Yeah, obviously, I think like the climate kind of set the stage for like any kind of sparks to fly out to catalyze and become like huge fires. And that was a perfect example. The last couple of months have been a perfect example of that. Coming to this new institution, I was kind of weary of like, you know, the kind of like culture and community I was stepping into, but I was really impressed when within the first week of me being here, I saw like, you know, students like picking up signs and getting together and like marching down the street, and something that you wouldn't think you'd see in like a smaller community or smaller town, but like they were out there and they were being loud and they're, you know, having their voices heard, which is something that I really, really support and advocate for. Within my current department right now, we've had some students that have spoken to some of our professional staff and director of our department to talk about how can we improve within our own department and organization in terms of having these conversations and facilitating these kinds of conversations. Something that I'm doing now with my staff that they've actually like, you know, kind of put together, which is great. They said that they would like to have like these conversations on a bi-weekly basis. So every week we have a staff meeting, but every other staff meeting, we take some time to have a conversation about what's happening in the world. We're also reading a book called Race Talks that I can like, you know, forward you some information later if you'd like to check it out. And we're actually doing kind of like a common read book club type of situation. So we read like 1 or 2 chapters every week, and like one of my RAs or one of the students will like facilitate the conversation for that week. And it's something that like, maybe like with your close friends, or for example, me and James, we chop this up all the time and we talk about it all the time, but within like a work setting or even with like the students that you serve, that kind of conversation doesn't organically come up because of, you know, some individuals are afraid of saying the wrong thing or hurting somebody's feelings or triggering somebody, which is valid, you know, but I think within the realm of education and with professionals that like at least have a curriculum to know what they're talking about, I think having that space and that structured kind of thing is really beneficial, because like the more we talk about it, the more we can feel comfortable talking about it. Because I really think the first obstacle is like that little feeling in your chest and like, you know, the anxiety and the feeling of uncomfort when someone brings up race and race talk.
I would definitely say, to add on to like Kayshen's point, you know, like his department is working on acknowledging that, and so is my department, right? I think other countries kind of do this really well as well. Like you have like Germany and South Africa who have acknowledged their past, right, and are trying their best not to repeat that. So with Germany, they do like trips to Auschwitz and Berlin. You know, they have light poles and street signs and concrete sidewalks of those who have died during the Holocaust. And I think South Africa, they're working on an internal community relations type of thing. And Trevor Noah definitely speaks about all this with his upbringing and being born in South Africa and things like that. And I think ultimately, like it's like I said, it's the acknowledgement. They're not shutting people out. They're not like, people have to learn about this. So then that way they know, okay, well, this was bad. How can I not do this again? Or how do I prevent other people from doing this again? America they have a tough time with acknowledging their past when, you know, they don't remember where they come from. Like we don't remember. Like do you know how America was formed with protests and riots and wars and things like that? It didn't just get here. And I think ultimately people have to acknowledge that. You have to remember, like, America, this place was not just sunshine and rainbows, you know, like there are wars, there are protests, people have died for this country. And everybody has died for, like, there have been multiple people, like Black people including, Latino people including, you know, women including, who have died for this country, these people are treated lesser than. And I think that's the ultimate issue. Like, we got to start acknowledging these things.
You're absolutely right. And I think that America is the king of scapegoating when it comes to acknowledging their misbehavior. And it's interesting the way they like to highlight others. Like the mere fact that we had like a Holocaust museum, like long before we ever had any monuments that were testimony to slavery or who we really forced to build railroads, and just like the people who built this country. And the fact that we always love to just like pass the buck and be like, but look at what they did, let's obsess over that and take no acknowledgement into the things we've done. And one of the things that bothers me especially now is just, if people are sitting here trying to understand, like, what does systematic racism really mean? Well, it means that they're no longer teaching the Trail of Tears anymore. That's when we marched Native Americans like clear across the country to basically take the rest of the land. And if you don't understand the roots of what truly brought this country to power, then you can't really get a good understanding of what systematic racism is now. And so we need to start teaching these things. They need to be more open conversations. I think they could be brought into English classes by just bringing more literature in. Like, there's no reason I shouldn't have read Martin Luther X before graduate school. Like, I should not have to have been like in my late 20s before I was introduced to that type of stuff. Whereas like the Confederate flag can just be like anywhere at any time, you know.
Right.
And so, like, people also don't realize like these things are in PDFs, like on Google. Like, you don't have to buy a book to find them. And as a white person, I know like you may be like, it's kind of hard to read people hating white people because he's really mad at white people, and justifiably so. Like,
Yeah.
this is what it looked like from the other way around people. And all he was screaming for half the time is that like Black people deserved land. And the way I look at that now is that like Black people deserve housing and like access to housing and mortgages and things of that
Resources.
nature.
Yeah.
Like, we just like we're still shouting about the same things. They're just in different ways. And so I recommend people to like go online, type in Angela Davis, like start reading those short PDFs that you can find without getting a book. If you're just like, I don't have the money to go on Amazon. You do have the money to go on Amazon.
Yeah, right.
So like, you need to get engaged, and it's not up to everyone else to teach you. We have to take it onto ourselves to decide that we don't just want to say like we're a good person. Like, we have to be anti-racist. So
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that
To your
the
point,
campuses
Morgan,
are doing it.
To your point, just one more other thing too. I remember having this conversation a lot with like Kayshen in undergrad, and I think for me, like just knowing who I was like as a Black man, like a lot of that didn't come about until I was in undergrad, you know, until I realized that, wow, like I'm like one of the only Black men in my class, or one of the only Black men in my organization, you know. So you know, just hearing the things that people have said and seeing the things that have been done towards me, towards my friends, you have to unlearn a lot of information that you learned for like 18, 19 years. And for most of us, it's in college. Like you know, wow, I'm Black. Like I just noticed this. You know, I've been living this way for 18 plus years. You know, oh, I didn't know this information, and then it's a process. You know, and I don't think that anybody, and I'm not encouraging anybody to learn all this information at once, but I am encouraging people to gradually learn, because that's what's going to help us move forward. So I just wanted to mention that.
And just to piggy off that as well, like I feel like a lot of the times the conversation is just centered around like white versus Black people and like the dynamic that exists there. But there's obviously an entire spectrum and an entire community of like other races and like ethnicities and heritages. So me being a Latino man, like I find myself being like, you know, navigating this conversation and navigating the world with the light skin that I have and the privilege that it gives me. But then coming from a family where we cover a whole melanated rainbow. My father is of dark skin and my mother is of white skin. He is Dominican, she's Puerto Rican, but we all come from the same like Latino roots and the same Caribbean islands. But even like outside of like the US, colorism is still a very pervasive thing in a lot of cultures. And that, like, you know, being indoctrinated is like a real thing systemically all around the world. And that carries here to the States. So for example, Dominican Republic, from, you know, that's my father's side of the family. That's an island that the right side of that island of Hispaniola is Dominican Republic, and the left side is, you know, Haiti and the Haitians. And you'd think that these people would get along great, but in fact, they do not. The racism and the prejudice that exists on this very small island by people that I'm pretty sure share the same native blood and roots, it's ridiculous and it's crazy, all because of the indoctrination that those people have undergone, that the Haitians are less than, that they're animals, that they're this and they're that. And then on that same island, you'll find that individuals that have lighter skin or lighter eyes or lighter hair color will be treated as like higher class, or will have more access to like, you know, other opportunities and resources. And then you take a small island like that, for example, and like everything that they're going through, and you like, you know, treat that as a microcosm to like everything that's happening in the world. And like, where's the epitome of that? And then when you come to the US and when you come to media and when you come to like, you know, the people that you see on movies and TV and like what standards of beauty are, all these things are things that pervade like through society and through different cultures. And getting down to the root of that, especially as somebody who isn't necessarily Black or white, it's important to acknowledge your place in that and to see like how you're still upholding like, you know, systemic racism.
Ooh, oh boy, nice.
All right. So obviously we've been mentioning a handful of either like books or authors for people to be interested in. Is there anybody, you know, speaking, you know, as professional leaders yourselves, that that you find, you know, demonstrates true leadership, or that you idolize, or just like anybody out there that you think people should be paying attention to if they're not?
I would say for me, one person who I always kind of give credit to, especially with learning about politics in this world, is Angela Rye. And everything I do, I try to uplift Black women's voices because I think those are the voices that are most diminished. So Angela Rye, she's a political commentator, works for CNN. She's been a part of the Congressional Black Caucus as well. She challenges racism and sexism a lot, especially on CNN. I mean, if you have YouTube, I recommend you go on, watch her videos. Like, she goes off and like she's authentically herself. Like, she will tell you like it is. And she will also say like, here's why you're wrong. And I'm going to give you some facts on why you're wrong. Definitely she trolls the president. I mean, that's really funny too. Like, her current Twitter handle is, I paid $750 in taxes. So that was like she's just like really dope. And I think ultimately, like, we got to start seeing things like that too. We got to start seeing people where that you don't normally see in the limelight. And I just posted on my Instagram too as well, like probably like a month ago, just like 10 prominent Black people who I think people should know, because ultimately Angela Rye, Representative AOC, Viola Davis, Angela Davis, Muhammad Ali, Kobe Bryant, these are all people who are bigger than their professions, bigger than their sport, bigger than what they're doing. And I think that has called me to be bigger than what I do. I'm a resident director, but also like I'm somebody's son. I'm a married man. I'm making sure that I have my affairs in order, making sure that I'm leading the right way because of these people, because they have led the right way. Definitely make mistakes, and they are definitely human. But I think ultimately you have to make sure that, if people are leading the right way, if they're guiding the right way, these are the people who should be your role models. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think any kind of platform you have is just that, a platform, no matter how you gained it through. I forget the name of like the news anchor, like the news station that called out. Was it Kobe or was it LeBron who said like, just keep playing basketball and keep dribbling your ball?
Fox News, Laura Ingraham.
Yeah. So something like that, like, okay, like let's just shut down this pivotal voice that like matters to so many people and is such a huge like source for like representation. Like what? Like, how are you going to say something like that? Representation to me is something that I strive for, not only to be somebody, not only a male, but like a leader and a scholar and an academic in a community where like there was none of that coming from like, where I come from, but like those are like, at a higher position right now in the world with their platforms and how they like, how they represent and like the communities that they come from and like what that shows me and what that shows other people. AOC is a perfect example. Like I remember crying literally at like watching her little Netflix kind of thing, like, the introductory of like her life and her background. And there are so many scenes that like you could have like put me or my sister, my cousins in there, because it's like, that's where I come from. Like that's my life as well right there. And like, look at the type of individual that she is, representing Latinx women and Latinx people overall. And just to say like, like I have a platform and I could stay in my place, but like I'm going to voice my opinions and make myself be heard, and look at like the tremendous like voice that she is now. So we can do that too, and anybody can be there. Like it doesn't make anybody special. Like it just requires knowing maybe a couple vocab words, having a big voice, puffing out your chest, and just like having a platform and saying something.
Yeah, and I really want to thank you guys for both mentioning women. Like when you ask men this question, it is not often that they immediately advocate for strong intellectual women. Women dropping facts, women pushing boundaries, women opening their mouth and making themselves be heard, because there's so many other people that cannot open their mouths either out of fear or the lack of finding the words, like you're saying, like the vocabulary for it. Like sometimes it's just hard to get those thoughts together. And to have people out there leading the forefront is absolutely integral, for sure. And so, I mean, since you guys brought up women and whatnot, I think I'm gonna nominate Chadwick Boseman. So, I just want to say that he was an incredible hero, like period. Just such an incredible person and so inspirational. And I know you guys feel that way too. And I just wanted to thank him, for doing that work, putting in that work. And I don't know if you guys all know this, but at one point he gave up some of his salary for one of his female actresses.
Wow. I did not know that.
I did see that. It's incredible.
Yeah. So like, not only was he an advocate for just like, and so important to so many children who have not seen themselves be heroes, but he stood up for women next to him, because he was like, you deserve that amount of money. And I've seen other people like myself who have not gotten what they deserved all their lives just for something as trivial as the color of their skin. Mm-hmm. And for her, it was what her genitals happened to look like. And they put her in some pretty fancy outfits. I would say that they ought to give her the credit where the credit's due. You know, if you want certain things on screen, sometimes you gotta pay for them. So I had a quote because I was trying to decide what I wanted to say about him exactly, and I was like, you know what, he did it better himself. And what he told people is that, you know, you all have purpose. And he says your purpose is an essential element of you. It's the reason you are on this planet at this particular time in history. Your very existence is wrapped up in the things you are here to fulfill. And I think that's just such a powerful thing to remind anybody who's listening today, that like everybody pretty much is sent here with some sort of a purpose. And Chadwick went like above and beyond in fulfilling his, that's for sure. I think we can all attest to that. But I think that everybody has something that they're especially good at or that they're meant to do. And that I encourage everybody to live out their purpose. And it's not always easy. And James and Kayshen will tell you that being in leadership and dealing with college kids and things like that, it's not easy. I told myself that lie when I was like, I'm going to become a teacher, but at a college level, because it'll be better. No, they can drink now. Like, it's not better.
That's what I always say.
They have like 3 things on their mind, and none of them is my sociology assignment, you know? So, and Michelle Obama, so I'm gonna say as my leadership idol, she also was a sociology major before she went on, and she was always, and I think that people like us also are able to take those types of interactions, those cultural settings, and to like apply them to public policy issues. So I think it's funny, a lot of people you don't ever realize actually where this sort of information is going to be helpful. And when I found out that her and you know, I was also like involved in those types of studies, it made me feel even more encouraged, because a lot of people are like Morgan shouting about whatever, trying to get us to volunteer for whatever, fundraising for whatever, like, oh my God, again and again and again. It's like, all right, well, some of us have a purpose. We're here for certain things. And she tried to revolutionize the food industry for kids in school systems, and she revolutionized like garden education programs in DC. And I just watched that all get gutted, you know, when Trump stepped in. And so that was hard, because I felt like we were making strong progress, and I felt like Michelle was absolutely leading the way. And now we have almost nothing. So we're going to have to build again, y'all. We got to rebuild. So if you are not getting ready to vote, please consider, if you like feeding children nothing but chicken nuggets and saying that ketchup is a vegetable, because it's not a vegetable, man. There's a lot of sugar in it. And they have convinced them that ketchup counts as a vegetable. And I can't stand by that.
I agree with that. I will agree with that. It's not a vegetable.
Yeah, I never knew there was a stance on that.
Yeah, that's crazy.
This is what we're dealing with. And I feel like policy is the only way to fight it, because I mean, I shout as much as I can, but there's only so much that my shouting and my article writing or anything can really do at the end of the day. If we're going to let people just make completely immoral, irrational, crazy decisions on a whim.
I wanted to... Oh, go ahead, Morgan.
I was just gonna say, because their kids go to private school.
Yeah, right. I wanted to like shout one, you know, like just point out some resources for people, you know, as they're kind of watching this. You know, you mentioned Chadwick Boseman. The inspiration for my ring, as it obviously is not the actual ring that he wore. Black is like my favorite color, and it kind of like symbolizes like just that hero mentality, you know, like being something bigger, being somebody bigger than myself. So, and you also mentioned like, you know, Chadwick's quote about purpose, right? And I wanted to also point out that he said that during the his Howard commencement speech. So I would encourage everybody to go check that out. It's really great. You know, he mentions a lot of great things, one about Howard, about Black people, and about people in general. And then I wanted to move on to Michelle Obama. She has her Becoming book out. Obviously, I bought my wife that book. She's still reading it. So I would encourage people to check that out. And also, I think she has a Becoming series on Netflix. So a lot of great ways for you to learn about these people if you don't know about what they do or what inspires them. So I would encourage people to start there for both Michelle and Chadwick.
And just like to piggyback off that, I know James like just said this like earlier too. Like a lot of people talk about like, where do I start? Like, where do I begin? I'm pretty sure that you have a supercomputer sitting in your pocket right now. Like
Mhm.
all you
Yep.
have to do is take that out and Google search just a couple keywords together. And by the time you go down that YouTube, like, you know, rabbit hole or whatever it's called, like you can find something to educate yourself on that you can watch for, you know, just for more than 10 minutes. Any kind of
Mhm.
BuzzFeed video or a TED Talk, anything like that. Like even if you don't know where to begin, just type in racism or or consciousness or whatever it may be, and like dedicate yourself 15 minutes to researching that as opposed to maybe just like scrolling through your TL.
And I would say too, Case, you mentioned like videos and movies, right? What was the zeitgeist? Zeitgeist was like what got Kayshen and I started on this whole like consciousness, like changing our minds kind of way.
Question everything.
Yeah, like it's a real conspiracy theory-esque like documentary, especially in undergrad. We're very impressionable. We were like, oh, this is crazy. Like the government's doing all this, but that's kind of what got us started. And from there, we were just like, oh, well, like, are they telling the truth about this? Well, let's like research this a little bit more. So, I mean, there's something out there for everybody. And once you find that one thing where you're like, wait a minute, I did not know this. Let me do some more research on it. Research will never hurt anybody. We all do it today. Like I'm randomly Googling, like, I don't know, what are the top 10 like handstands people? I don't know, just like random stuff that you know, you can always Google. You have a supercomputer in your pocket, like Kayshen said. So
For sure. Like get engaged on whatever platform you are going to any day anyway. Like if you're an IG person, put in hashtag racism, hashtag Black Lives Matter. Like let those hashtags pop up on your feed suddenly. You know, if you are the type of person who doesn't like to read, yeah, like hop into YouTube. Like these, there's all these different types of forums that are more accessible maybe to like the way you prefer to learn, or if you need to be a little more entertained and things of that nature, like they're out there. And if you're not paying attention to Trevor Noah, like pay attention to Trevor Noah because he just spits fire like every day and I adore that man.
Daily Show, you gotta watch the Daily Show.
For sure. So, Kayshen, you mentioned the Covenant House before, and I was just wondering if you guys had any nonprofits that were near and dear to your heart.
I'll let Kayshen take this one.
So for sure, like Covenant House is really at the top of my list just because of the time that I personally spent there. And I don't know of any other places right off the back of my like, you know, head that really like take care and like, you know, attack every like different kind of like level of need that like a young adult will have. While I was there, I met with lawyers that provided like free legal services, behavioral health and like social worker, you know, specialists to like help with those kind of matters. And also like individuals in the community like yourself who would go out and prepare like just like food and lunches or whatever it may be. I remember I met like a group of like Stockton students that came through and just like took some time during the holidays to like just like chill and like get to like meet with like the residents that were there and make them feel like people, make them feel like humans and not like making them feel like street urchin or anything like that. So that Covenant House is very near and dear to my heart.
I would say for me, New City Kids, you know, we kind of started this whole conversation with talking about like leadership. And I would say that New City definitely set me up for that. As a teenager coming from the inner city, New City was able to hire myself and amongst other teens who lived in Jersey City, New Jersey. And we taught the kids who went to the elementary and middle schools around there. So we taught them education and arts and community service, all these different things. So to teach like a young child that, right? To teach a teenager that coming from the inner city where I didn't know what community service was. I didn't know what professional development was. I didn't know what college was. You know, New City set me up for all of those different things. They took me on college tours. They gave me SAT prep. They made sure that I was able to see different professions, not just people who went to college, but also people who like maybe have started other nonprofit organizations or who were a part of the different private organizations as well. So I think I definitely want to shout out New City. It's a faith-based organization within Jersey City, New Jersey. And probably I would say a decade, they've branched out to not just Jersey City, but to Patterson, to Michigan, where the founder is from. So I think they're doing some great work. I encourage people to check out newcitykids.org. You know, donations are always accepted for them, but I think I definitely want to shout them out because without them, I definitely wouldn't be where I am. And I know that there are many kids from Jersey City. I know that there are many teens who have graduated from the program who definitely would love to shout out New City. So big ups to them.
One more quick shout out. A very good friend of mine from my high school days in Vineland, Annalisa Chiro, she currently works at Hope Loft, which is a nonprofit dedicated to serving the community in Bridgeton, New Jersey, if you're looking for something more local to New Jersey. They house a lot of other like projects that go around in the city. So it's a really acts as like a cultural kind of hub or umbrella for like other projects in the city. Something that Annalisa started herself was an online magazine for LGBTQ youth, as like a meeting space, and especially now a virtual meeting space for preteens or teens to like go on and like talk about like, oh, what cartoons do you like, or like look at my drawings, or like look at these magazines or these articles or whatever it may be, just as a resource for like a community of people that, or a resource that like we didn't have growing up, especially for that kind of community of people. So quick little shout out to Hope Loft.
Absolutely. Representation matters.
Mm-hmm.
Having subgroups and community matters. We are herd creatures. I know we like to forget that. Here in America, we're all about the individual, and we're all about, you know, just like, we're just about personal glory, it seems a lot of the time. But we forget that humans are meant to support one another. We're meant to be seen and heard by one another. And when those things don't happen, is when we see massive disruptions in the streets. And that's what happens when you ignore people for too long. So I absolutely encourage everybody to look into both of those organizations, whether or not you are close to Jersey or if you're just interested. There's plenty. Also, I've seen Covenant Houses in other areas. So if you're not from Jersey, pop Covenant House and see what pops up. And there's a Boys and Girls Club in every community almost in America. So check out the Boys and Girls Club and, you know, give them an email and ask them what they need. Sometimes they want board games. Sometimes they need somebody to help manage all of the crazy kids who are running in circles. So everybody's got one. So that's definitely one thing I would encourage everybody to check out. All right. So if you could encourage all of the people listening, everyone in America, to do like one thing, one call to action, you know, what would you tell them to do today?
Deep. Did you want to take that one first, or you want me to go?
No, yeah. One call to action. So I'd say like this is a reoccurring, you know, conversation that James and I have, and a conversation that I have with a lot of like individuals on campus, you know, is when it comes to like, you know, feeling uncomfortable or like not knowing how to approach like race talk, you know, because we've been talking about that this entire time. I'd say it really truly starts at the dinner table. That's something that James and I say all the time. I know a lot of individuals want to seek out resources and like, you know, get into different workshops or like different Zoom calls and, you know, educate themselves. And that's great. But like, what are you doing if you don't start at home? If you don't start at home with your boyfriend, girlfriend, with your husband, with your wife, with your children around the dinner table? A lot of the most like influential or like shaping conversation that I've ever had in my life have been with my family at the dinner table, where we talk about very important things. Sure, we can have small talk and chop up like, how's your day? How's class? How's school? But like, we also talk about like life experiences and like traumatic experiences from like, you know, from childhood, from my parents' childhood and like things of that nature. And like what's happening today in our society, how it affects us. Chop this up at the dinner table, have this conversation with those close to you at home, because a lot of the times that's the most difficult conversation you're about to have is with that significant other or with that parent at your house.
That's deep. I would say definitely for me, just to piggyback off of what Kayshen was saying, was that people need to have more compassion and more empathy, and most importantly, be authentic, right? I think that's what should guide us in this country. You know, we create resources, like we are in America, you know, we create things for people to succeed. And I think that when we have compassion for other people, when we have that empathy, when we can say, wow, like, you know, I understand why you're going through this. Even just this morning, I was having a conversation with my wife about my dad, and I'm just like, there are a lot of things that I don't know about him. And although growing up, I felt like, you know, my dad was just doing things just to do them. Like looking back at my teenage years, I'm just like he had a really rough life too. You know, like there are a lot of things that he had to struggle through and he had to battle through that ultimately brought him here today. And I would say to the authenticity piece, like you have to be yourself, you know, engage in those uncomfortable conversations and also be honest. You know, like if you don't know something, that's fine, but be honest with that and want to learn about something. You need to always constantly be doing that. I'm constantly learning, like Morgan, you're constantly learning, Kayshen is, and I think that's what we have to get to in America. Like we need to be compassionate to other people. We need to be empathetic, and ultimately we need to be our authentic selves, because that's all we have going for us for this time being. So, yeah.
Yeah, and Kayshen, you're absolutely right. Like, if you can't have a hard conversation with your uncle around the dinner table at Thanksgiving, how are you going to convince somebody who is on the other side of the protest with you? So if we don't start talking with the people who are closest to us and the people who we have the most likely ability to have a genuine and true and respectful, hopefully, conversation with, we're never going to be able to reach that other side completely. And change starts at home, change starts with us. And I agree, it starts at the dinner table for the most part. In my family, we had to watch Jeopardy while we ate dinner. That was the rule. So that may have that may have driven some of the like aggressive, intellectual, competitive nature that I somehow forged in my college years. And we talked about our lives and what we'd be going through in our days and whatnot too. And I just think that even having dinner together was such a substantial part of my early years, and something I miss now that I'm not living, with a family anymore. And just the nature of the support and the depth of the conversations that you can have with people while you're having food. Food is life. So yeah,
That is true.
I agree, definitely. Well, I have absolutely loved this conversation so much. I want to thank you guys so much for being leaders in our communities and for coming out here today and sharing all of your thoughts with us and your authenticity with us. It's been really, really fun.
Morgan, thank you so much for having us on. We've been looking for ways to kind of get our voices out there and trust that these are not only our voices. Like, we're speaking for those who are not on this podcast. We're speaking for those who who have this information, who's been talking to their friends and they need to get something out. Those are the people that we're speaking for. So thank you so much for having us on.
Yeah, I really appreciate you just creating an actual space to discuss this and then being organized and structured enough to be able to present it to others and creating a platform for yourself. So I really commend you for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Honestly, this is what we're here to do. I am not always the expert in the area, but I was able to go to college. I was able to go to graduate school. I've got this white skin plastered on me, and that gives me a platform in some ways. People are just somewhat more likely to hear my opinion, maybe. And I hope that everybody realizes that every one of these shows, that it's not me leading the house. You guys are the reason this show is here. I wouldn't have it if we didn't have people like out you doing the work every single day. So thanks for being here again.
Thank you.